All right, so we're here with Tommy Beer, NBA analyst for Basketball Insiders. Tommy, thank you very much for coming to join us with the Knicks Fix team.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So just to start off, tell me a little bit about yourself. I mean, you're a writer, clearly a Knicks fan, and how'd you get into all of this?
Sure. Grew up in New York, Long Island, born and raised. So I was a big Knicks fan in the 90s and, basically throughout my whole life. Went to school up in Massachusetts and at Holy Cross, lived in Boston for a little while, came home and basically been living in Queens ever since. I've been started writing for Hoops World, the site that is currently known as Basketball Insiders right now, about 10 years ago. Just kind of, doing menial, plug and play stuff early on. And then eventually worked my way up to a writing position, and from there have had the opportunity, fortunately, to cover the Knicks going on about 8 or 9 years now. So it's been fun.
Would you say the Knicks are your favorite team?
Yeah, I get asked that question, especially by my friends and stuff. It's difficult to be a fan of a team once you kind of peek behind that curtain, once you learn how the sausage is made, it's a little bit difficult to kind of have that blind faith, be that true fan. Obviously, just from the journalistic perspective, you want to kind of maintain an independent, train of thought to be able to write coherently about the team. There are certain, the lines are a little bit blurred nowadays. Like, we know it's Bill Simmons, arguably one of the most well-known sports writers in the country, is known as a Celtics fan, doesn't hide it, and lets that, kind of bleed into his work. And there's certainly a place for that as well. I try to toe the line a little bit more. I think I joke that you're not a good writer, or at least a respectable writer, unless you have people on Twitter tell you that you were the biggest homer on earth and you're such a hater, I never want to read you again, So there's probably a little bit of that both ways. So I do kind of, to be honest, to answer your question directly, I do kind of miss being just a fan.
Yeah.
I'm a big Detroit Lions fan. Football is kind of my favorite sport to watch, and I think I enjoy it more. And I'm a bigger Lions fan now than I was, 5 or 10 years ago, because I can just throw myself in there. I don't have to worry about covering the team or thinking about angles or thinking about being nonpartisan. So there is a certain, enjoyment I get out of just being a pure Detroit Lions fan. When it comes to the Knicks, I try to be a little bit more level-headed and try to think of it from, both a fan and a journalistic perspective.
So starting with the Knicks, obviously this is the topic within the Knicks Fix. What are your expectations for the season? Where do you think this team's going to go?
I think the great part about covering the Knicks is there's always something to talk about. And I think this Knicks team fascinates me because I think you could argue that no team has as high an upside or as low as floor as the Knicks do entering the season. Of all the teams in the NBA, I think it's possible you could argue the Knicks have a chance to win 45, 48, 50 games, best case scenario, if Rose stays healthy, if Noah stays healthy, Courtney Lee does what he's supposed to do. We know what Melo's going to bring to the table. KP is only getting better. As Brandon Jennings, avoids, any Achilles, injury, any remnants of issues with that. And everybody plays up to their expectations. The bench contributes. I think there's a possibility they win high 40s and, 4 seed, 5 seed, 3 seed possibly in the East. There's also, I think, that on the reverse side of that coin, chance that the Knicks win 29, 31, 33 games, something along those lines. Rose gets hurt. Noah gets hurt. Melo's angry. He's not getting enough touches. They don't involve KP enough in the offense. Jennings shoots a lot, misses a lot, turns it over a lot. The new guys don't contribute as much as you'd like to off the bench. So I think it's fascinating to see how this Knicks season will play out.
Awesome. Well, so I guess you bring up great points about involving KP and all that. However, we're going to move on to Phil Jackson. So what do you think about the Phil Jackson era this far?
I think it's difficult to judge him right now. I think there's one – the most important moment in the Phil Jackson tenure was that 4th pick in the 2015 NBA draft. I mean, that's the one at bat he had to hit a homer. It turns out he hit a grand slam.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. He's made some dubious decisions. The Calderon for Chandler trade turned out to be a dud. We'll see how the Rose trade turns out. I think a lot of it's left to be determined. I think the Courtney Lee signing was a good signing. I like the Joakim Noah signing. I understand it's 4 years, probably a little bit more money in years than you'd like to guarantee to Noah. But I love Noah, the player, in terms of a culture changer. I think we'll be able to fully judge Phil Jackson on opening day next year. He's got another – I assume they're not going to re-sign Rose. We can talk a little bit about that, but I assume they're not going to bring Rose back, which will give them, and Jennings as well. They'll give them about $28 million in cap space, which will allow them to sign another top-tier free agent. I think they're going to make a run at Chris Paul. So I think that there's a possibility that they have a very talented, very good team heading into the start of next season. If and when the Knicks are still a poor team, non-playoff sub-500 team next season, then I think the Phil Jackson era can be, classified as a failure. But until that point, I guess I'd give him a B-, a B, something along those lines, but mostly to be determined at this point.
So do you think if the Knicks have a terrible season, there's injuries, Rose doesn't work out, Noah proves to not be able to move as fast as he could on defense, do you think this is Jackson's last year?
It's difficult. I think with it sounds like the NBA is making real solid progress in terms of work stoppage. So that's a really good sign. I think the opt-out, he does have an opt-out in his contract. I think he was concerned about that, and that's one of the reasons he was concerned about a work stoppage. That's why one of the reasons he had some flexibility in his contract. So I do think he'll stick around. Even if they have a poor season, I think he understands it's for the long term. To his credit, he hasn't traded away draft picks, hasn't crippled the cap. He's maintained flexibility, which is obviously something that's been important to him. So I think he's left the situation in good shape. I think he's given himself the opportunity to make a real swing at a star player this summer and kind of, he has the other core pieces in place. Obviously, Porzingis is the foundation. Melo's still relatively in the prime of his career. And now he's got Courtney Lee at shooting guard and Noah at center. So if he can add a top-tier point guard to that mix, and ideally that's what he would do next summer, I think he's going to give himself that opportunity and put the Knicks in a good position to be competitive going forward.
Okay, so continuing off of that, it seems like Phil's the GM, but he's also trying to get into a little bit of a coaching gig. And what I mean by that, articles have been coming about him coming down with a clipboard on the court and basically trying to teach the triangle. What do you think about that? Do you think there's some confliction between him and Hornacek? I think that's a good look.
I think, to his credit, Phil has been willing to kind of set aside his strict adherence to the triangle. It's obviously something that he's concerned about, focused about. He wants to prove that it can work. He wants to show that it does work. But just the fact that he was willing to hire Hornacek, he kind of went out of his so-called coaching trade. I think we were all worried that he was going to bring Rambis back. The fact that he didn't, I think, speaks to his willingness to at least consider other ideas and a little bit of versatility in the offense. I still think Hornacek incorporates a lot of the triangle fundamentals that are important to Phil. More importantly, I think most importantly, he's physically not able to coach. If he was, I think he would have considered doing it this summer. But I just don't think he can get, just physically, he medically won't be cleared to, as a 70-year-old guy with bad hips to coach 82 games. He's not going to coach just the home games and let somebody else coach the road games. So I think his decision was bring him Hornacek, and that's the guy he wants moving forward.
Okay, so now let's transition into the defense. Obviously, the Knicks brought in Courtney Lee and Joakim Noah for that purpose, to guard the ball. What do you think that the Knicks can do defensively? What more needs to be added, and what errors are you seeing that are being made?
Sure, I think that's something Hornacek's talked quite a bit about in the preseason, so that's something that he's going to focus on, and it's something, quite frankly, that needs to be focused on. And I think the most important linchpin to that is Joakim Noah. Again, the 4 years, $72 million is a lot to invest in a guy that hardly played last year, and the year before was injured as well. So the real benefit and advantage of having Noah, I think, is he's legit. Like I said, he's a guy that can change the culture. He demands, defensive intensity, defensive integrity from all his teammates, which I think is a great he's a great mentor to Kristaps Porzingis, because at this stage of the game, the Knicks' future is about KP. So it's like having a great college educator, to mold a young mind like KP. And to his credit, Porzingis is very open to listening to all types of advice. And then on the perimeter, you got Courtney Lee. So I think, the two highest, the guys that Phil Jackson brought in the summer, the two guys he spent the most money on were two defensive-minded players. So I think that bodes well for the future. If they want to be competitive, as we know, in this league, you essentially need to be a top 10 defensive team in order to be considered a legit contender.
Yep.
So until the Knicks do that, there'll be nothing more than a 500 team. If they ever want to get really good, they need to be a great defensive team, and Noah and Lee are two steps in the right direction.
So we saw in the second game when the defense went out, the Knicks blew a lead. And while some might say, like me, that the reason why the Knicks are going to most likely blow leads is because they don't have the depth, is that the reason why you think they aren't able to play consistently over 4 quarters, or do you think there's other reasons behind that?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, obviously, we're just 2 games into the season, and as we know, the Knicks didn't have much time in terms of training camp to get together and kind of get on the same page in terms of develop chemistry and cohesion. So they're kind of working from a deficit in that perspective. And also, they played the Cavs opening night, who are the best team in the conference.
Yeah.
They certainly did better in game 2. It'll be very interesting to see the bench guys. I think because Mingus has a great upside. I really like what I've seen from Hernan Gomez. Good hands, good basketball IQ. He's going to struggle a bit defensively. Jennings is going to be up and down. There's going to be good Brandon Jennings games and bad Brandon Jennings games. He's going to turn it over a bunch, shoot ill-advised shots. So there's cause for concern there. So that's why I think Rose staying healthy is important. We'll see what we get from backup shooting guard. Holiday's looked better than I thought he would in the first 2 games. I think it's kind of take a wait-and-see approach and see how that goes on, going forward.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Tommy, do you think they'll make any changes in mid-season during the trade deadline?
It's an interesting question. I think a lot of it will come down to how well the team's playing in February. Are they close to 500? Are they a couple games over 500? Are they 10 games under? I think that addressing a backup shooting guard is something they might look at. I guess do they really want to clear cap space? Those are questions I think. Like I said, because their upside is so high and their floor is so low, it'll be difficult to determine exactly where we're going to, what we're looking at in February. But I think by the start of the new year, 20, 25 games, 30 games into the season, we'll have a much better feel of what this team can be, what this team looks like. Do they have a legit shot at making the playoffs? If so, I think they'll make a run at it. If not, I could see them trying to, make some moves and clear and make sure they have as much cap space as possible cleared next summer. So that might involve trading a guy like Kyle O'Quinn, something along those lines. So that's something to keep an eye on.
So in terms of the deadline, you don't think it would really be worth it for the Knicks to make any moves since, if they aren't playing well at sort of the end of the season and they should just wait till free agency?
Yeah, it's if and when they can make a move that would clear a lot of cap space, that they can make a run at a top tier, to clear more cap space. But a lot of the guys that they might consider trading, maybe a Derrick Rose or Jennings, are on expiring deals. They're not going to move Noah or Courtney Lee or Melo, most likely. We know that he wants to stay here. Obviously, Porzingis is off the table, so they just don't have many tradable commodities. Other than they can make a minor move, but I don't see him making a big move with any of the core pieces of the team.
Okay. So in terms of the offense, we talked a little bit about Hornacek's fast-paced style versus Jackson's. Do you think having a hybrid's a good idea? And if not, do you think we should commit to the triangle or the more offensive-oriented, newer era, fast-paced offense?
Yeah, I think it was imperative that the Knicks kind of updated and revamped their offensive approach. Phil Jackson had great credit with the triangle. Certainly not going to take anything away from him, but he also, had 2 of the greatest players of all time, essentially on each of his title teams. Whether it's Scottie and Michael, or Kobe and Shaq, or Kobe and Pau. And more importantly, the game has just changed. The clowns like Charles Barkley say you can't win, with jump shooting teams. It's just frankly not true. The Cavs and the Warriors each led the league in three-point attempts last season. They were 1 and 2. They both went to the finals. There's such value on the three-point shot. Whether how much you want to subscribe to analytics or not. The fact of the matter is, if you shoot 40% from three, it's better than shooting 67% from two. The data just shows there's a higher value on shooting long-range jump shots in today's NBA. And with as many teams doing it, either you do it or you get passed by those teams that are successful doing it. So I think Hornacek is a step in the right direction, bringing a guy like that into the mix, because he's stated he wants to pick up the pace. The Knicks have been last in fast break points each of the last 4 seasons, dead last each of the last 4 seasons. In terms of pace, in the bottom, third of the league, last 4 seasons. So they need to get at least, I'd say, league average in order to be competitive.
Yeah, I was just going to say, related topic. I mean, it seems like the Knicks really struggled with defense on the three-point line, right? It was like teams came in and just shot 3 after 3, and the Knicks did nothing about it. Do you see that changing? Do you see the defensive philosophy changing this season?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's something that crippled the Knicks. I think having Jose Calderon as your starting point guard, makes it real difficult to be a solid, solid unit defensively, especially on the perimeter. So adding Courtney Lee, I think, was imperative. I think there was their focus. They needed to in today's NBA, you need to make threes and prevent other teams from making threes. So I think Courtney Lee, having a guy like Porzingis that can switch pick and rolls and challenge shooters, him playing more. A guy like Noah has some versatility. He can run out and challenge stretch 4s or stretch 5s. So that's been a focus, obviously, the Knicks in this offseason. And they'll need to prove it in game action. But at least the fact that they've addressed it, I think, is a positive sign.
Okay, so one of the things that I was going to ask you about is Hornacek was very similar to Mike D'Antoni, at least in my opinion, with the run-and-gun offensive style. So do you think a few years ago when D'Antoni was coaching, it was just a matter of his personality and he couldn't get along with Melo, and it seems like he was a little bit more focused on the point guard than Hornacek seems to be, although we do have better point guards. Some could argue that Derrick Rose is better than Lin, and we'll leave that topic out to the side. But with D'Antoni doing well, what are your thoughts on that whole era as coach? You look at it differently now that we brought Hornacek back in? Yeah,
I think Hornacek's a little bit different in terms of D'Antoni. I mean, D'Antoni was literally 7 seconds, as the saying goes, 7 seconds or less, left a lot to be desired defensively. I think Hornacek's a little bit of a intermediary, a little bit of a compromise between Phil Jackson's system and the D'Antoni run and gun, ball at all pace, shoot as many threes as humanly possible. I think there's a balance to be struck there, and hopefully Hornacek kind of walks that line.
Okay.
And what do you think of the Knicks Randall back from the D League to the actual roster?
I think there's a decent chance. Ron Baker did play really well in the preseason. He earned his spot on the 15th-man roster. So I think they'll monitor Randall's status in Westchester, and I think there's a decent chance that he eventually gets bumped up. I think if he hadn't gotten hurt, if he hadn't had the eye injury, he'd probably be on the roster as we speak. But he got hurt, and Randall stepped in and made the most of his minutes. So with the 15th guy, it's a little bit tricky. Fans want the guy with the highest upside and the most intriguing prospect. Sometimes a coach wants a guy that's going to practice well, practice the right way, be intense and, kind of demand the most of the guys he's going against in practice. So it's difficult for an outsider to judge exactly what a coach is looking for in a 15th man. It's not always now, if and when Rose or Jennings gets hurt, then you have more of a pressing need. So you might see the more NBA-ready player come in and play. But it sounds like Hornacek likes what he has with Baker, so we'll see how that situation plays out. But obviously, Nick's going to keep a close eye on Randall. And if he starts playing well in Westchester, they'll certainly bump him up. I could see him and Baker flip-flopping at times during the year. One comes up for a few games with the Knicks, the other one goes back down and kind of working the rotation that way.
Interesting. Do you think that Baker over Randall was the right move? You sort of touched upon it was more about potential, but do you think if you were in the position, would you have made the same move?
Yeah, I think with the eye injury and just the fact that you need a third point guard on the roster when Randall wasn't available, Baker showed that he's not afraid to play in big spots. I understand he's not your prototypical NBA guard, a bit slow, a bit undersized. but plays hard, plays the right way. Gets into it defensively, which is a positives. So there's a lot to like about Baker.
Yeah, it seems like Randall is very similar to Galloway, but with a better shot.
Yeah, to be honest, that's one of the things I thought. I think the best case scenario for either Randall or Baker is to take the kind of the Langston Galloway route to the NBA. Kind of, obviously undrafted, overlooked. Hone your skills in the D League. Prove you belong. Teams will take notice. The Knicks will take notice. Playing in their backyard. Bring those guys along, and then make big shot. Make shots when pressed upon to do so in the game. Galloway kind of got pressed into action because of injuries along in the Knicks backcourt the last couple of years. And he parlayed that into a big contract with the Hornets. So obviously Baker and Randall will be looking to do the same thing.
Okay. So two more questions, really. One of the things that we wrote about early on in the season, at least in my opinion, it's time for Kristaps Porzingis to take over the team. And while Melo still needs to shoot just as much, I think it's more important, as the Knicks most likely aren't going to win a championship this year or next year, that Porzingis starts gaining the confidence on offense. So do you think that it's time to turn the reins over to Kristaps, or do you think we should slow down on that?
Yeah, and I totally understand that perspective, and while I completely agree that the future is Kristaps Porzingis, he's the future of the franchise, I honestly don't have a problem. I know a lot of people, trade Melo, get KP in there. I don't like Rose because it's, going to take away shots from KP. If I have Porzingis on my fantasy team this year, I want him to take as many shots as possible. But if I'm Phil Jackson or Steve Mills or Jeff Hornacek, I'm thinking long term. To your point, the Knicks aren't winning a championship this year, so I don't need Porzingis to shoulder too much of a load. I want him to slowly but surely, build his comfort level, build some endurance. In other words, don't put too much on his shoulders too quickly. I think surrounding him with guys like, ball-dominant players like Melo and Rose, while frustrating in the short term, may prove beneficial long term. I want KP to get, situated. He's still just a baby unicorn. Let him get his legs. Let him get his legs underneath him. Let him build up his strength and some endurance and stamina. And he'll figure it out as time goes along. You don't need him to be the focal point of the team until another 2, 3, 4 years down the line. So I'm actually a proponent of taking as much time and giving him as much time as necessary. The kid's still going to work hard. He's still going to learn what he needs to learn, especially learning under the tutelage of Joakim Noah and playing alongside a guy like Melo. I don't have a problem with him taking a backseat to these guys this year. I understand it's frustrating, watching, because we see the talent. We know it's there, and if need be, he could score 20 plus points a game, and he should be shooting. You could argue he should be shooting 18, 22 shots a night. But like I said, let him take his time. It doesn't. I think it might behoove the Knicks and benefit them long term to bring him along slowly as opposed to rushing his progress.
Okay. So second to last question. This is about the guy that took up all the drama in the offseason and moving into the preseason. Do you think there's a chance that Derrick Rose could stay till next year if he plays well? What will it take in order for him to play well, and what does that look like? And is there anything that takes less money if that's the case?
Yeah, I think this is just kind of a one-and-done situation with Rose this year. I think it's, like I said previously, I think Chris Paul is the guy that the guy the Knicks have their eye on. Fortunately for the Knicks, I think what Phil Jackson saw was he didn't want to overpay for a point guard this summer. He wasn't sure about Mike Conley, and for $153 million, I certainly don't blame him. And there just wasn't any other star point guard on the market. In today's NBA, you need a stud point guard. I think Rose will play well, relatively well. But at the point, I think Phil had in mind when he traded for Rose, he's got $21 million coming off the books. He signed Brandon Jennings for a $5 million contract. He comes off the books. That's going to clear about $26, $28 million in cap space. And the 2017 free agent point guard crop is one of the best free agent classes in NBA history. It gets hurt by not having Russell Westbrook there, yes. I assume that stung a little bit from the Knicks' perspective because I think they were seriously considering making a run at him. And I think it sounds like they thought they had a chance should he hit free agency. So he won't be available to 2018. But still in 2017, you got Chris Paul, like I said. Kyle Lowry is going to be a free agent. Jeff Teague, George Hill. Steph Curry is going to be free agent if something crazy goes on in Golden State. Obviously, I expect that not to be even a possibility for the Knicks. But there are a ton of talented point guards available, that will be up for grabs. It'll be very interesting to see how the Clippers season plays itself out. If it ends as disappointingly this season as they did last season, getting bowing out early in the playoffs due to a bunch of injuries. Blake Griffin's also free agent. We know that Melo and CP3 are very good friends. We know about the toast at the wedding that they wanted to play together. He's going to be a free agent, and if you select Chris Paul and stick him in the Knicks starting lineup, Chris Paul, Courtney Lee, Carmelo Anthony, Kristaps Porzingis, Joakim Noah in the Eastern Conference. Is that the second best team in the Eastern Conference next year? Maybe. Is it a top 4 team in the East? I would argue yes. And I think that appeals to Chris Paul, an easier path to the finals probably than as opposed to the difficult, more tougher, tightly stacked Western Conference. You still have to go through LeBron, etc. But I think that gives the Knicks, I think the feeling would be we have a good chance to go to at least the conference finals if we can get Chris Paul in a uniform. So that being said, I think that's the grand plan. If they can't get Chris Paul, they'll certainly Derrick Rose plays well, they'll certainly consider bringing Rose back. And he sounds like he's happy here, so we'll see how it plays out. But I think that's kind of the grand plan from the Knicks' perspective is try to get one of those stud point guards, and if not, have Derrick Rose as a backup plan.
It's funny as you say that. I feel like, as a very passionate Knicks fan, one of the things that we always do, and what I do, is look till next year, and we say, oh, well, there's the off season, there's free agency. But for some reason, it never happens. We wanted LeBron, that didn't work out. Kevin Love, we could potentially have traded for, that didn't work out. And, all these rumors, the Chris Paul thing will definitely have, Knicks fans salivating. But the question is, will it happen? And I guess that's something we'll have to see as the season plays out. There's the Clippers factor. There's also the factor of how well the Knicks are going to play, excluding Rose, it sounds like.
Yeah, and also Chris Paul is going to be 33, and you're going to have to pay him $20 million. There's going to be Knicks fans that say, I don't want, Chris Paul. I want a younger Derrick Rose if he plays well. I happen to be a big Chris Paul fan. I think he's a superstar. I understand he hasn't had success in the playoffs, but I think he makes your team better. In the right situation, he'd have a much better playoff record. I would push my chips in to try to get Chris Paul if given the opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with you. Given his game, he doesn't play an athletic game. It seems like he's one of those guys that can play until he's a little bit older than 33, maybe 38. So that's a 5-year window. And, he's not a scorer. He's really good at leading the team. He can dish the ball to Melo and Porzingis. I think you're right. He'd be a great fit to, divvy up the offensive shots.
Yeah, exactly. He's not one of those guys, as you mentioned, he's not one of those guys that's over-relying on explosiveness, athletic. In other words, I'd rather have Chris Paul at 33 than Russell Westbrook at 33, who's dependent on slashing and driving and attacking the basket, whereas CP3, set of players, especially if you surround him with good shooters, he'll find a way to make teammates better.
Great. All right, Tommy, so the last question for you, and this is just about the Knicks franchise overall. I don't know if you saw the Stephen A. Smith, Max Kellerman first take when they talked about how the Knicks are the laughingstock of the NBA. Do you agree with that? And otherwise, if you don't agree with that, why do people have that perception, and how can that perception change? What will it take?
Yeah, I saw that in passing. I didn't read too much about it. I didn't hear what their arguments were. But I think it's, listen, the Knicks have had their issues, and there's certainly a lot negativity that's floating around the team and the franchise over the past few years. But they do have an owner that's willing to spend a lot of money. They are trending in the right direction. They do have Kristaps Porzingis as the franchise of the cornerstone, who's not just a great player, but a terrific person, the kind of guy you want to build a franchise around. Hard worker, humble, confident but not cocky. Basically everything you want in a franchise player, and I think he has a possibility to be a top 5, top 10 player in the league sooner rather than later. So I understand the knocks on the Knicks. Their fan base are crazy and get excited and get knocked for that. But you have a passionate fan base in a passionate city that's passionate about their sport. Things could be a lot worse. Let's put it that way. So I think the Knicks are trending in the right direction, and if a little bit of luck, a few right decisions, and they'll be back on the path towards at least playoff and respectability, hopefully relatively soon.
All right, well, fans, once again, this was Tommy Beer. Tommy, thank you very much for spending the time to speak with us on the Knicks Fix team. We look forward to the season, and would love to set up an interview with you at another point as the season gets going.
Absolutely. Be in touch. My pleasure. Keep the faith, guys, and it was fun talking to you.